no longer a weakness. They feel better about it because they feel confident enough on something they need to know.
Oh, let's go. Party time.
It's a whole continuum, and every single preference is on that continuum.
Adjust their chin angle down so they can perceive the ball up a little bit more.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of the MPE Pod. I'm Nick Robinson alongside Matt Swope, Matt Woods. Today we have a very, very special guest. He's the Big Ten Player of the Year, Brooks Wallace Award winner. He's the all-time home run leader at Maryland, two-time Big Ten champ, 2022 Cape League MVP, where he was also a champion there. First round pick from the Cubs, number one prospect in 2025, NL Gold Glove third baseman finalist. Welcome to the show, Matt Shaw. Welcome. Wrap
Hey,
it up.
thanks. Thanks, guys.
Long list there. Long list. How's everything going?
Great. Yeah, it's going great. I'm just happy to hang out with you guys and catch up and talk baseball.
Absolutely. Off season's going well so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty relaxing this time of year. Don't have a lot of things on my schedule other than, lifting and spending time with my wife and my dog. And so, yeah, it's a nice time of year for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So one thing we were talking about starting with when we have our guests come on is just having you explain in your own words what motor preferences is.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think for me, like, motor preferences was a way to unlock a lot of answers that I had about things. I think people talk motor preferences a lot on the hitting side of things, which is great. Um, but I think as a holistic baseball view, lifting view, everything that kind of came along with playing in professional sport, motor preference kind of helped me guide through, those different avenues to understand my body, to understand the way that I move. Um, and, it really helped me to ask less questions and understand my body better. And, as I've gone through and like had the full season in the major leagues, you realize pretty quickly that just the competition is so good, you're going to fail a lot. But B, that, you take, even though you have the answers, you still need someone to guide you with your cues and your feels because, we talk a lot about like feel versus real. And, that's where I think it's important to continue to have conversations like that we're having now is even when you know what you're trying to do, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to accomplish that. And I think that's kind of where you need to have conversations constantly of, hey, I'm trying to do this. This is what it looks like. And maybe this is a different cue, a different feel that might get you there. And that's something that I definitely struggled with this year is finding the cues and the feels that go along with what I'm trying to accomplish. And so I think, the motor preferences in general is amazing and it gives you a guide and a blueprint and a map of your body and what you're trying to accomplish. Um, but I think like for me, motor preference has allowed me to take what I'm doing to the next level of like these are a bunch of different cues that might get you there based on the blueprint that we have. Let's try a bunch of different ones and see what works with you and your body and your feels and your brain. And I think that's kind of where I'm at today. But overall, just having some of the answers to those questions has been extremely helpful.
I think like, interacting with you and, us becoming really, really good friends. Like when I first met you and first committed to Maryland, I remember the first phone call we hopped on. I literally had committed 2 hours ago and you hopped on the phone and you were like, so, talk to me about your approach in the box. Like like I literally just told you I committed and you're like, what's your approach in the box? Like, talk to me about it, like right off the jump. And I think, I'm telling that story more so from, from how intentional you are with your work. And I think it's no guessing game why you reached the level you have reached and why you're going to be super successful for a long couple years. But I think you being so intentional and then giving you those answers as to why and you understanding that, you're going to go to the ends of the earth to try to figure out, what makes you special. And if you get handed those answers, it keeps you away from going down some of those rabbit holes that may not be as good for you. So I think, for people in your shoes and athletes all around, like I think one thing to take away from Matt was how intentional he was, even in that first phone call after I committed, asking me what my approach was.
Yeah. I mean, you were, and he was like that from the minute he walked on campus. So that's the thing is like he always had the intention. He was always super talented. But there's two things. Like what we're saying is essentially is like this gave us a baseline, right? Like he was always doing these things that made him good, right? But maybe not understanding why or how it applies to it, right? So you have this baseline that you're creating. And number two, communication, right? Like there was never a time that I felt like we weren't on the same page or able to have a conversation on how to get on the same page based off that baseline. So to try to kind of bring it back full circle, it was always something that he had innate about him that was fantastic, but that baseline and communication was so key to our relationship, even to today, where, you know, I know Matt very well. I know what he's going to say and kind of feel before he does it. But then it's interesting when you bring in David into the equation, he's much more describing it the way he wants to describe it. And then I'm trying to discern it for Matt, and we're trying to get back on the same page. So, but maybe that he says something um, that gives Matt an idea or a feel or something that's kind of how his brain works. That's what makes the conversation still like so cool. And like Matt said to start it, necessary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think what's unique about you, Maddie, here is that you were kind of there from the start of it. So someone that I know just by watching every day was someone that just was really bought in early. But talk about like your initial reaction to or the earliest memory you might have in terms of motor preferences, maybe just staying closer to your one, or what was that early memory like?
Yeah. I mean, I was someone who, you know, believes and gives something the benefit of the doubt until like it's shown to be wrong. I did that with a lot of things. Like before motor preferences, I'm trying a bunch of different techniques for hitting. And I spent a lot of time trying a lot of different things and trying them through. Spending time working through it, having the experiences, having the failure, having the feedback. Um, and so motor preference wasn't the first thing that I did that with, but come to motor preferences, the feedback that I got was pretty extraordinary compared to all the other things that I had tried. And like you said, the first thing I did was, making sure I stayed on my one, like my most balanced move dial, which is my right forefoot. And that was extremely helpful. Something that I already did a little naturally because, of course, that's what your body wants to do. But something that when I actually started focusing on it really helped clean up a lot of things. Um, and like anything, I was like, I bought in right away because I'm going to give it the chance to basically prove me wrong. Because I don't want to miss out on something because I'm doubting it or not believing in it. So I worked through that, and it was very quickly that I started to realize I was like, wow, this is really helpful. This is like very true to how my body wants to move. The feedback on the field was like extremely successful. Once I started applying those things, so it was one of those things where I'm really thankful and feel really blessed that I believed in it right away because I think it just gave me a lot of different experiences with the motor preferences. But I mean, overall, I could say that, yeah, I mean, I think the motor preferences from the very beginning was something that worked amazingly for me. And I know other guys who bought in who feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing was just right off the bat of like the mental alleviation, right? So, I think my conversations with Matt early on where people were telling him to have his back heel anchored into the ground, and he just never totally had like he never really did that, right? It was never really fully that thing. So it was sometimes when you're like, hey, this is maybe what you want to do, it's not that he was stressing about it, but it's like, hey, we can check the box and say, hey, I don't have to do that, right? Instead of scouts coming over and say, if he put his back heel on the ground, he would create more force and hit the ball harder. And you're like, okay, but what if he doesn't hit the ball, right? So there was cool moments early on where he may not have thought about it like that. But again, you're just checking those mental boxes where you're not worrying or you're trying to go through trial and error and time. We always talk about time as such a big thing. We didn't have to do that. So there was like mental checklists that we were going through, being on the same page along the way that was kind of parallel. That was also really cool. I remember from the beginning.
Maddie, when you were implementing for the first time or you started to learn about your preferences, like if you had advice for hitters, or even anyone in general who's starting out with motor preferences in terms of starting to peel back the onion of the information, like where did you start? And I know I have my answer, but I also know like me and you were different in our careers in terms of when we implemented it. I was interested to hear what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it there's different people in different stages of their career. I was lucky enough to be young enough where like there was no there was no fear to buy in, right? I was, a freshman at Maryland. I was like, I guess this was kind of more in my sophomore year. But I was like, heck yeah, like I'm gonna buy in completely. I'm gonna learn what this is about. If it doesn't work, then I'll move on to the next thing, And I think in general, for me, obviously being at that age, it was really helpful to be able to do that. But even if I look at it where I'm at now, in the big leagues, and if I was learning this for the first time, um, there'd obviously be some things that I have close to my heart that have brought me here, right? But at the same time, I think having some time during the off season is the perfect time to say, yeah, let me buy it. Let me spend a month just diving into what this is all about and see the actual feedback that comes from it. Right? I mean, that's the only way you learn whether you like it or not, whether it's true or not, is to actually spend time doing it. So, of course, in season is a whole different animal. It's a lot harder to make adjustments. Things are coming at you a lot quicker. You're playing every day. But I think there's really no reason when you have a long period of time, whenever it is, if it's your college fall or if it's the off season and professional baseball, to say, let me just at least spend a month diving into what this is all about and see the actual feedback that comes from it, see how I feel, see the progress that I might be able to make, and then again, I know and I believe that like if you do that, you're going to be like, wow, this is actually really exciting. And I actually feel like this is a lot, my moves are a lot easier. They're not as forced, right? Those little things. But it also takes the time and the effort to be willing to spend that time to learn and to let yourself figure those things out.
Yeah, and I think for most professional athletes, you're leaving no stone unturned. Like if you're a good professional athlete and you want to be at the top of your game, you have to be willing to take in a ton of different information, right, and filter that through and use it as a tool or a guideline because you want to be the best you can be. Coaches do that, players do that, and I think that's kind of almost non-negotiable if you want to be successful. So couldn't agree more on that. I mean, but it was definitely um, having guys when you're at Maryland and kind of going through that process with you before you got there, gives you time at least from an experience standpoint. But we get players with all different times in their career, and a lot of times it's just how can you filter at that information and communicate about it, and it in the end it really mostly comes down to the communication and understanding of what you've done well and how your body feels.
Yeah, I mean, coming from another school and coming in my fifth year, I learned it at the opposite end of my college career compared to Maddie. And I think, what I remember so much is, just the communication that we all had with each other, but also like just noticing how balanced everyone was and everyone looks like different. I remember, us talking about it, whether it was going back to the room or just sitting there and playing Xbox where like I just remember thinking about how balanced and repeatable everyone was. Like I took pride in being part of a team where, we would get into the cage every day. We would all have our two of our three of all our get right type of drills just to be balanced and just remembering how like repeatable guys were day in and day out from a balance standpoint, which I always thought was really cool and took away a lot from that year.
Yeah.
What you brought up, Woodsy, like that process of you guys, but you guys spent a lot of time together being roommates, swinging it a lot together. What was that like from a conversation standpoint? Like what were those conversations like in the cage? I'm sure a little ridiculous at times, but in
He didn't
terms of
want
like you guys going to
to get me.
you guys being specifically you two are very opposite movers. So what were those kind of conversations like? And um, Shaw had an opportunity to go through it for a year prior to you getting there. So what was that like and kind of communication in the cage?
I remember him like just breaking it down super easy for me, just being like, yeah, it's just how your body prefers to move. Like, I know where I'm balanced. Like, I know what I have to do every day. I can take, I mean, this guy would go right to machine without even doing flips or T or anything. He'd just be like, yeah, I know what I got to do. I mean, and that process didn't work for me, but he was he was on the machine when he woke up out of bed.
So Ariel,
So aerial. So
ready to get going. Can't take it slow.
So I remember those conversations, just talking about our different preferences. And I think the big takeaway for me was we were both associated. Like he may have been aerial, I may have been terrestrial, but I really leaned on him a bunch to, feel some of those association cues and some of the drills and real versus feel that he tried to feel every day. So I remember the conversation just being, so great where, in another setting, like yeah, you have your roommate who's, projected to be a first round pick. And, usually most part of the time you try to copy everything they do. But I think from understanding that, we were different in some ways and similar in others, I could lean on him in the ways that, we were similar. And then, where we were different, it was like no problem. Like just stayed away from it and that was fine.
Yeah, I think Matt's giving me too much credit. I think he picked it up pretty quickly. I don't think, but yeah, I mean, overall, like we understood, the basic blueprint of what we're each trying to accomplish. We understood that that meant there was plenty of things we were going to do differently. There was things that, and that was a good thing, right? It's like you're not making a bunch of robots who hit the same way because you look across the major leagues, you don't have to look that far. You look across Matt's swing and my swing, and they're completely different, right? And everybody knows that. You look at Pete Alonso versus Juan Soto, like you look at all these swings and they're all so unique and so different. It's like, how would everyone do the same thing and try to accomplish the same thing if all their swings are so different, right? That doesn't make any sense. And that to me made a lot of sense that everyone was very different. Everyone's trying to get to a balance and a coordinated position because, quite frankly, if you're just trying to hit the ball as hard as you can, the ball is moving just way too, it's just so hard, right? I mean, people are throwing, I mean, we in the average, I had a conversation with DK, our hitting coach, during the postseason. It was right after we played the Padres in the wild card. And I struggled through the wild card a little bit, and well, a little bit. I struggled through the wild card a lot of bit. I had like 8 Ks and like 10 at bats. It wasn't great, but we were talking, and he was like, "What do you think the average fastball velocity was?" And I was like, "Well, probably 95, probably 96." I was like, "That's given the benefit of the doubt." And he's like, "Well, it was something like." 98.8 or something, or 99 was the average fastball velocity velo. So, anyways, I say all that to say, like, to me, it always was common sense that being in a coordinated position is going to help you to be able to put the barrel on the baseball the most times. And we've always known, you look back, 50, 60 years ago, right? And what do guys talk about? They're like seeing the ball and hitting the ball, right? They're not saying like we tried to hit bombs. They're like we literally tried to just put the bat to the ball. Um, and I think obviously your strength and like stuff that you develop, like, yes, you will hit the ball further and farther. But I've also seen guys, and I've been there plenty of times, where I'm swinging as hard as I can and I'm hitting a 65-mile-an-hour dribbler to third base. And it's like, yes, I think the general concept that being balanced and being coordinated and that we're all very different in our swings, it just makes a lot of sense to me. And it makes a lot of sense that that's something that I should be incorporating into the way that I go about my drills, the way that I go about communicating what I'm trying to accomplish. And that doesn't mean it's easy, but at least it means that I have an idea of like, hey, I'm clearly making this mistake. Like, it might not be easy to fix it because there's a lot of things that could be happening, but at least I know it's a mistake. At least I know like it's probably not the right way my body wants to move. Like lunging at the baseball and swing as hard as I can. It's like, okay, that's probably not a good idea. I mean, probably for anyone it's not a great idea. But
No, I think the mental clarity, like you hit the nail on the head there. Like we've always known that everyone looks different, but like why and how do we find out what ours is? So I think when I went in there from a recruiting standpoint, and I was ready to commit somewhere else, and Swope, broke it down for me as to why I, could only top spin breaking balls to the pull side, and he was like, this is why, and this is what I see, and this is what we're gonna do because of this, and I was like my mind was blown there. Like I think I looked at my dad right when, Swope had to head out, go to the bathroom or something, and I was like, no, I'm coming here. I can't not know what this guy has to say from a clarity standpoint, and I don't have to rack my brain about what should I do. I don't have to rack my brain about let me try to swing like, Acuna, or let me try to have my hands here when I get to heel strike, or that mental clarity was like the biggest no-brainer for me all ever.
yeah, going off what you're saying, Matt, and kind of some thoughts that I have as well. It's like, there's a lot of things that kind of are kind of the general consensus, right, in the hitting world. It's like, yeah, like you want to stay through the baseball, like you want to have long distance in zone, you want to create like a heel connection, you want to have your head behind the baseball, all these things. And as I've gone through it and as I've learned more, I realize, yes, it's of course like there are some things that may be helpful for different players, but I think one of the big thing that motor preferences has been helpful for me is staying healthy. It's like, yes, I can do something that my body doesn't necessarily want to do, and I can be I can be successful, right? I can hit a double, right? It's not saying that motor preference is the only way to hit a home run, right? You can hit a home run with your hands flipped the other way, like Hank Aaron, like sure. But I think a huge part of motor preferences, especially when you're looking at the big league, the professional, the college level, where you're playing so many games, is like when your body is moving in a way that's free and easy and coordinated, you're so much less likely to get hurt in those movements. And I think that's a big thing of like when you look at some of the major leaguers that are highest in WAR every year, right? Like I think about even like a Nico Horner on the Cubs or Marcus Simeon, who ironically got like hurt for the first time. But I'm looking at players that like they move the way their body wants to move and it keeps them healthy. And I look at my career and I've been able to stay like, God willing, really healthy. And I think I give a lot of credit to motor preferences making me realize I don't have to do things against my body to be successful at hitting. I can actually be a really smooth, coordinated, efficient mover without forcing certain movements that lead to inevitable injury. And I've see you see it all the time with guys that are getting injured for now 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, a whole year, and it's like you just don't want that. And it's not to say that you're never going to get injured, but to have that idea so you don't have to force things against your body is to me it's really invaluable.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we just right off the bat is like T-spine mobility, right? Something that's very I mean, very common right now is like as a passive movement, we need a certain level of T-spine mobility, but your active move, wasn't a ton of separation when you actually hit, right? So little things like that, but then maybe getting your feet right, right? Getting you in the right soles. And Brandon Lau's like another perfect example of like he had another good year this year, was a little bit more healthy when he was in the right soles and that that he had in the shoes, he was able to stay a little bit more healthy. So it's little things like that too, just the education of knowing that like, hey, these are popular things that seem to be true, but what's actually happening with my body and what's happening day to day, because you can get confused very quickly when, oh, you don't have the T-spine mobility, that's what's causing the lower back pain, when it could just been the shoes or something different like that, right? Or the fact of no, like I'm actually at 32 degrees of hip shoulder separation at my hardest hits. that's an understanding from a different perspective as well. So I think we're all coming back to like things that are one, education, but two, time, right? We're talking about time and education and health and all just like very common sense oriented things that I think the hardest part is everybody's intentions are good. They really are. Everybody's trying to do the right things. But it's been proven with $700 million on the injury report just this year that's not what's happening though. So the more that we can have these conversations and educate, the better we're all going to be.
Yeah, I think just from listening to you speak a little bit about it, like you hear a lot about, listening to your body and using that as feedback just from you saying like, yeah, there's times where you can feel certain things, right? Just curious, like when you were early in that process of going through the motor preferences, were you more of like, I need to feel things out, or was it, I want to understand what the preference is, like go through that whole process? What was that like learning process like?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a little bit of both. Like you're feeling things out, you're understanding what you're trying to accomplish, but you also have to feel it during those movements. And I think, I mean, that's why I like the machine early on is like I felt like, and I'm learning, I'm growing. Like I don't just jump into the machine anymore, right? Like you're always figuring things out. But it was like I wanted to be able to control my movements in a somewhat uncontrollable environment. Now, I don't know if that's like scientifically proven. It might be the other way around where it's like you should control your movements in a controlled environment. So I'm not saying that that's necessarily true, but this is where my mind was at the time. That if I could go into the machine and I could feel and understand these movements, then they would quickly become natural where I was in a game, I could also feel and control these movements. Not that I was thinking about it, but that my body would understand in a competitive environment what these movements would feel like. And, that definitely helped me. And, now even going through, it's like, man, I still struggle with some of I hit in the cage my movements are great. I go into the game, you get anxious, you get excited, you want to hit, you want to hit a homer, and all of a sudden you're lunging and you're overstriding and you're crashing. And it's like, that's a whole nother battle of like understanding and being able to simplify what you're trying to accomplish by knowing exactly what it is that you are trying to accomplish. And so it was definitely a little bit of feel, a little bit of understanding, but something that I'm still trying to, find the balance between the two still of where I'm at. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. Like, yes, he would go into the machine because that was the environment that he wanted to see the movements happen. But you're not looking at what he was doing, the one-legged on the Bosu and staying on the one, and he didn't even know what he was doing. You're not going over the mental prep that he may have been doing in the apartment or in the shower or in front of the mirror. Those are all just as intentional, right? Those are all just as important. So he's not giving himself necessarily all the credit. He was doing those things. That just may have been how he was, easier to process when he went in there. So, and I think that comes down to more personality type. How do we move? How do we create the feedback? Like, how are we creating all the things of how we need to understand ourselves, right? And that's currently what I think he's going through the most is learning how to be, a pro, right? It's a different level. It's what does he need day to day in the routine? It's more games that's part of what he's currently figuring out. But I thought more than anybody on the team, no offense to Matt or anybody else on that team, he was definitely the most intentional from the minute he walked in and knew himself better than anyone and didn't let anything affect it, which is why I thought his mental game and his prep and his actual production was so good. He's just trying to find that now in a different way.
I remember I feel like that's such a good example of him being so aerial and like building his present from the future, like thinking about him feeling it off of the machine and making sure like that's what he's gonna feel in game where I was total opposite. Like when I was trying to close the gap of my real versus feel, like Shaw was probably sick of me repeating that move in the in the suite that we had my fifth year just in the mirror, like over and over. I was trying to feel and see me being associated at the same time every single day, so that when I didn't have a mirror in front of me, like I had that feeling and I could like feel it in BP and in, pregame and everything like that. So I think, from me building, my present from the past and watching video and looking in the mirror so much, I think it was just a cool example of, how people are going to go about it differently.
Yeah, to add on to like what you guys are saying, and like Shaw's probably one of the more detailed people that I've ever been around, at least like so focused on such minute details. And I could actually like imagine you right now doing like a dry swing with your chin down with a water bottle or something like in the middle of a conversation. Um, and to that point, like how do you take this information, what you get from a day to day, how do you adjust the pictures and things like that, and how do you get that information from a detail perspective, kind of digest it from an MP lens, and then be able to go and put it out there?
Yeah, I mean, even though Swope doesn't, he doesn't like to give me all the information. He thinks that my brain processes it in a unique way, which I don't necessarily agree with. But I think, going like this past season, I ended up playing in like the Premier 12 thing, and I had about a month of like true off season. So I didn't really have time to go over the details that I wanted to. And then I had the oblique injury in spring. And this isn't to make excuses, but it's just to say that like you need time to make adjustments, process details where like there's nothing going on, right? But in the season, it's I said it before, but it's a completely different animal. Like your ability to process detail of your swing mechanics, you just have so much less time and so much less room for error because, like you said, you're now you're processing pictures, the environment, um, you know, game planning for who might be coming out of the bullpen that day. All those things adds like so much stress and so much more things to what you're trying to accomplish. So now, you
All for
know,
the first time.
yeah, fair, but still, it's like I think like just now that I've gone through it, understanding that there's different parts of your season, there's different parts of your off season, there's different parts of your year where you're just doing different things. Like when you don't have when I'm not playing baseball, now's the time for me to spend an hour hitting in the mirror trying to see like this feel that I'm trying to accomplish. Now's the time for me to make mistakes, try different cues and different things and understand what I made mistakes on, understand what I need to get better at. And that's where motor preference is great to provide a blueprint to give me quick feedback of like, hey, that's just not like you're just like your shoulders turning, your hands are back here. Probably not what we're looking for. That's not going to help you in the game. Great. Now I can move on. I can adjust. I can figure things out. Um, but that's a really, I mean, when you're trying to do it while in a season, it's a really difficult thing to process, and your body just doesn't have the time to reflect, to understand what it's trying to do, and then those cues just don't come as easily. So, I think that like when you're looking at processing all this information, when you're looking at preparing for the day, having an understanding of yourself of what you wanted to accomplish going into the season makes it so much easier than trying to figure that out in the season. So I guess like it's to say that like understand what season you're at or what part of your season you're at in the year or whatever, and allow that to kind of guide how you use motor preferences right now, and understand that like when you do have time and you have space and you have the ability to try things, like use it because that's going to be extremely helpful. And I would not recommend, I mean, you kind of have to, but making big mechanical adjustments in the season is um, difficult to say the least. Yeah.
100%. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like when you're aware of, your blueprint and you make those changes, even in season, like you're working still within, the range of motion that, your body prefers. You're still like working around that number one balance point being in your forefoot. So I think, with your variations, you can get really concentrated and still know you're down the right rabbit hole rather than doing a whole haul or going down something that, may not, be as good for you. I think we have these conversations all the time, me, you, Swope, Nick, with a bunch of different guys where, when they get in a rut, it's always like, yeah, I was trying to get back to this, feeling I had 2 seasons ago, or I'm trying to get back to this feeling I had in this season, and I've been trying to replicate it ever since, and I haven't found it. I think, that's where when you're not aware of, some of your preferences and you're not aware on why you were good then, you can eventually never find that feeling again. I think I always remembered, something about you. We'd be playing at school and there'd be, maybe a weekend where you didn't have your best weekend, but it was never a up and down. Like it was just like, yep, like I just wasn't swinging at a strike, or yep, I wasn't on time all weekend, or like, yeah, my body just I'm just feeling like crap right now. Like I'll be good this week. Like I know what I have to do. Like there was just consistency in our work because of the why. And especially watching you go about your year this year, obviously like there are ebbs and flows in terms of experience in, the big league game in the season, so much for the first time. But, even with some of the variations you did, like it was all respecting, why and how you prefer to move, which was cool to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to come back to these baselines. I keep using that word, but if you don't have a baseline, it's you're hoping. You can't play professional baseball or even at the college level and hope, right? At least we want to go back to the water cooler, and if we have an understanding of how or why we got out, then you can maintain that confidence. When you start hoping day to day or pitch to pitch, you are absolutely screwed. So, and a lot of that. So if we can continue to come back to that baseline, we understand that we're not going to be 100% all the time, and we're not going to always, feel great or maybe have that energy. But if you have that baseline, you can maintain that level of what you need to do to compete that day, and what you have that day is good enough to compete. And I just think entirely too many times, if being in golf or baseball, you're going to tinker. That's just what it is. That like you're in the business of tinkering, and that's just because that's part of the game, right? It's a continuous strategy on doing those things. But if you don't have this baseline, I don't know many major leaguers that have had that much talent that they can just will themselves to just not have a lot of an idea of what they're doing. But God bless them for the ones that do.
No, the body changes every day. Like I think that's the big thing. Like it's gonna sound obvious, but you get older every day. So a cue that worked in high school might not work, your rookie year of in the big leagues, but it's just from the fact of we evolve every day, and there's these ranges of motion that we work in, and if we're aware of them, we can change those cues from a synonym standpoint, or we can have the same train of thought, just something a little bit different, and find our balance. Maddie, I remember a lot taken from you, some of the mental game stuff from a day-to-day plan against the pitchers we were facing. And I think by understanding our preferences, I knew the zones that I really like to hit, and you knew the type of pitchers and zones that you really like to hit. But I think just from like a preference standpoint, getting to pick your brain as a baseball IQ player standpoint, I felt like the conversations were were so high level, just because we were so aware of, how our processes were different, but the same at the same point. Can you touch a little bit on, some of the communication, that we had as a team, and then, some stuff that you guys talk about now from a game plan standpoint?
Yeah. I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking about game planning, about pitchers, about zones, type of pitches we like to hit, all that stuff. And yeah, it's no secret. We both felt that way in the box as well. Like, good four seam spinning guy, I got super excited. Like maybe a good like two
Most
seam
exciting.
guy, you got really excited. And that's still things that I'm trying to figure out, right? Because two seamers got just getting even better, right? Four seams are now all at 100, so it's like it's a constant adaptation. Hitting in general. There's some guys that know their zone and what they're trying to accomplish so well that they don't care about the different pitchers. I think now that I've had experience with it, I think that those are the best hitters from what I've noticed. Is the hitters that know exactly what their zone is, what they're good at, and they stick to it, right? Because pitchers they're gonna do things to get you out no matter what you do, right? And it's like we talked about the image of Trout or Soto, and like they didn't swing at a single ball above the top of their zone, right? Because they're terrestrials. They see the bottom of the zone better. They're going to swing at the bottom of the zone. And guess what? He's going to hit homers at the bottom of the zone too.
Mhm.
Whereas, similar as you, whereas me, I might do a better job at the top of the zone. This year I was lunging like crazy. So I was hitting balls, like just crushing balls, like 3 balls below the zone, just absolutely sending it. But I also didn't hit anything really that well in the zone. So that's a whole nother topic. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's now that I've kind of experienced like understanding everything about a pitcher, every count, what he wants to throw, all those things, and then realizing the mental grind of what it takes to play every day. I think the best hitters that I've seen and talked to, they understand pitchers, and of course they understand their shapes, right? What they have, what they have the ability to throw, what they want to get you out with. But the thing that they have the best understanding of isn't somebody else, but it's themselves, right? They understand I hit these locations and these pitches well, especially locations. So I'm gonna just make sure that my focus is on these locations. And guess what? If a pitcher doesn't throw there, right? You get a side armor that only is gonna throw down and in. Like you have to have the maturity to be like, man, I don't see this guy as well. I'm probably gonna at least see a pitch because like this probably isn't the guy I'm going to do damage off of because it's just like you just don't see him as well. I mean, there's no better way to put it than like when I got the side armor throwing 97, I'm like, I see the first pitch and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this might be like, yeah, I should probably see a couple
Yeah,
more,
it's pretty good.
like this guy's pretty good. And it's like, when you have the blueprint of understanding your preferences, and like these guys that I'm talking about, they don't know their motor preference blueprint but they've figured it out over time and experience. And it's like, how amazing would it be for young kids and young people and young guys moving up, guys and girls, whatever, to understand those things already and not have to like take 5, 8, 10 years to figure them out. And like Swope said, God bless the guys that have it figured out, right? Like I was talking to, it was a couple years ago, and I was lucky enough to talk to Mark McGuire. I said, "What made you successful?" He said, um, you know, he was like, "I just literally, I was good at hitting the inside pitch." So he's like, "That's all I wanted to do." He's like, "I just tried to, if they threw it in, I knew I was going to hammer it. If not, I tried to take it." And I think that's like the simple way of saying yes. When you understand your preferences, you understand what you're trying to accomplish. Like it really is a huge advantage for every day how you game plan. Even if you know all the information, but it's like, how are you planning to be successful with this guy? Yeah, you know he throws a sinker, a slider, a cutter, a curveball, and a changeup. Great. You know he throws it here, here, and here. Great. You have the information, but what do you do with it?
You
And
take
now
your
it's like,
you take your strengths to the pitcher
Well,
instead
exactly.
of letting
yeah, I
them
mean,
dictate.
yeah, these are the things too, is like the basic responsibility of being a professional baseball player. Like the only thing with MP that we haven't really talked about, which Matt was the first one to ever buy in and do it, was change your chin angle, right? So he changes his chin angle every time. That's something within a scouting report that says, hey, this release I may see better actually fix my chin angle. He does that. But there's an extra layer that you're responsible for. Can you sit pitches? Are you a guesser? Like you can't just go into these game planning day to days and not know these things, right? So these are like checklists. Yes, experience really helps that, but you need to know what type of hitter you are so then you can go execute. You look at the TrackMan data, it's no secret that everybody's trying to get Juan Soto and Mike Trout up in the zone. That everybody knows it, but they still have to execute it, right? So when you look at like how these guys can be so consistent, yes, they're ultra talented, but they know exactly what they're trying to accomplish and what they can do. And I think, like what Matt said, was the more we can have an understanding on those things, right? But besides the tangible adjustments we can make, like you have to know these things because there isn't a lot of time. Like Juan Soto and Mike Trout are like they have the long contracts, but you look at like what's the general, average big league time, right? Like I think it's around like between 2 and 4 years now. It's not very long. So you don't have a lot of time trying to figure these things out. So again, understanding these things about your body will give you that mental freedom, maybe to have a better plan or approach or strategy day to day.
Yeah, one of the big things I'm hearing you say and talk about is just like understanding yourself and knowing like your strengths and your weaknesses. And I think I've been a huge proponent of it, but I know that these guys have been too. Um, and just seeing your popularity online in terms of all the adjustments that you've been made. I know you're not a big social media guy, but how is how has understanding yourself kind of led to those adjustments that you made throughout the season in terms of stances?
Yeah, I mean, the season was definitely, really difficult for, I mean, the whole thing. But obviously, the first half was like clearly a struggle. I didn't perform very well. Obviously, if you're not performing well, like, of course, the first thing I didn't do was, oh, are my mechanics off? Is my approach off? Like, am I confident? All those things. And then of course it got to the point where it really was not playing very well. So I made some, mechanical adjustments. Some that the Cubs, recommended of, being a little more taller. Um, you know, I eventually moved my hands up. And I think the part where my adjustments were the most important, and that kind of ties back to where the motor preference came in, is that a lot of things that I tried to do were kind of finding a little bit of my old swing of what I did in college. I don't know, like stupidly got, okay, this is maybe what Matt Swope says. Like I stupidly like kind of dove too deep on some things, made adjustments I didn't need to, right? Like you look at my swing in college versus like second year pro ball, and it's like very different. I don't know why I did that, but here we are. So obviously made some mistakes, but like understanding exactly what I knew that I was trying to accomplish in college, taking that and applying it to what now I knew I was trying to accomplish in the major leagues. And that helped me to realize that some of the adjustments that I made were definitely needed, to just get myself in at least a better position for like the second half, right? Like at the very least, let me make some of these adjustments and just like try to be as athletic as possible and figure it out. And then I'll handle everything else in the off season. So, having that baseline of like just a couple things where I was like, okay, I know I can do this well. Let me at least like try to do this. Kind of like I don't want to call it I don't want to call it a last resort because it wasn't. It was just like I guess I was a little bit stubborn in changing because I had already been hitting pretty well before that. But realizing that I could always go back to the motor preference stuff to say, okay, like this is something that I have to at least be balanced, at least be coordinated, at least be athletic. And that got me through the second half. Like good, I played much, much better. Of course, there's other things that you're working through with playing in the major leagues. The pitching's very good. You're playing, you're traveling. It's just different. So going through those things was hugely important. But again, I think the most important thing is when you have time to make those adjustments, of being very intentional, like we've talked about, having the baseline of not going far down a rabbit hole that just isn't good for you, right? Like I can take 30 swings and send it to Matt and it'll be like these things look really good, but like this might not be the best idea for you. Like this year, I started doing a kind of trying to bring back my leg kick. I was like, maybe it was the leg kick I was missing, right? Like, because I leg kicked in college and I didn't this past year. And it was pretty quickly, they were like, well, listen, like, you don't need your leg kick to create the power the way you do. It was just something you kind of happened to start doing, and you did it, and it wasn't necessarily a bad or a good thing, but you don't need it. And that was important for me to be like, yeah, you're right. Like I'm not going to try to reinvent my leg kick. Let me just do a much smaller, much simpler, balanced move that's going to allow me to be successful or be on time as many times as I can. So that's where the motor preference for sure just helps me from going like, this is your off season, right? This big kind of circle to like, okay, we're gonna focus kind of on these things. This is what you need to do. We're gonna avoid all the noise of like adjustments here, there, and there. Let's really dive into these things. Let's become really good at it. And then when the season comes around, you're gonna feel so much more confident of what you're trying to do. And that's huge, especially for like Matt said, it's a what Swope said, it's a tinkering sport, and you naturally want to continue to grow and become successful and find any edge you can. But at the same time, you need some sort of baseline so you don't just find yourself down a bunch of different rabbit holes.
Well, and he's talking about some of the changes that he made. What was funny was the changes that we had discussed was getting him to see better, right? One was to see better, and actually the end goal of a similar swing. So people see him closed off or then open a little bit. It was mostly predicated on seeing, and two, how do we accomplish the same swing? So that was interesting. And I think he got down a little bit of a bad rabbit hole. His intention of what he was trying to do and think was the good intentions, but it was actually just not necessarily maybe productive to how he should be moving. So he was trying to do the right thing. It just wasn't ending up like that, right? And what we tried to do together was well, definitely in this first year was not overcoach. So what we tried to do when we actually made the adjustments, obviously what the Cubs are saying, but to see the ball and like how can we achieve this move more associated after that.
Yeah.
Well, what's really cool is we've talked a lot about hitting. But if anybody that knows Shaw, he's really prideful in the defense that he plays, and might have more fun playing defense than he does swinging it a little bit, which is unheard of. But what was cool is that I was there at Maryland when you were making that transition over to shortstop, and you spent a lot of time with Tommy Gardner over there. First off, like what was that? Where does that sense of pride come from a defensive standpoint? And then we'll talk a little bit about like just some simple adjustments that you guys made over that transition year.
Yeah, I mean, I always look back to when I play at Cooperstown. Um, we had a good Cooperstown team, and within the first kind of 4 games of Cooperstown, it was pretty clear to my coaches that I was not a good enough hitter to be in the lineup. So I was kind of riding pine the second half of Cooperstown, and I'd come in as a defensive replacement. So every now and then, and this is Cooperstown. I would come in like in the 6th inning, 6 was the last inning, and I'd play defense at second base. And I always loved defense. I always loved like practicing defense my whole life. Defense was something that I really, really enjoyed doing. But since then, like I was like, yeah, okay, I'm better at defense than I'm hitting. So I actually spent a lot of time like, man, I need to kind of be a better hitter. I should probably focus on that. But my whole life, I've always really enjoyed defense, and I think that's kind of where all of it came from. Is that I do enjoy it. I enjoy being out there. I enjoy the fact that you can work really hard at defense and get better, whereas you can work really hard at hitting and not necessarily get better, and that can be really frustrating. But defense is one of those things where it's like, man, you could just take a bunch of ground balls. You can do your routine. You can lock in on everything you're trying to accomplish, you're going to become a better defender. Like, just kind of how it works. Whereas hitting, I mean, you could take thousands of swings, like which we know is not going to accomplish much, but you could take thousands of swings, and it's really at the end of the day, you might be getting worse at that point. So I like that part of defense. It felt like the one thing in baseball that I kind of could control a little bit. It was like the one thing in baseball where I was like, I could just work really hard at defense and I can become better. So I think that's where my kind of intrigue with defense started, was that it really was like kind of yeah, you can work really hard and you grow. And hitting is just such a unique animal with the mental game, your approach, your swing, the environment, the pitcher that you're preparing for. I mean, there's so many things that it's like, a lot of times it's, you do everything right and it's out of your control. You're out, like head back to the bench. Um, so yeah, that was where I loved defense for sure. And I'm sorry, all this to say that Tommy was extraordinarily helpful. And when we figured out that motor preferences, not like it was a secret, but we were like, wait, why are we not applying motor preferences to defense? And very quickly, my defense went to like super squatty, like, and I was getting eaten up by baseballs to like very aerial, aggressive, kind of keeping everything in front, never getting like too squatty and too low. All of a sudden, like my defense really did take off in that way where it was like, wow, now again, I mean, I have a baseline of what I'm trying to accomplish on defense, and now I can work really hard at it, which is so much more fun than hitting because you have a baseline of what you're trying to do hitting, and it's just, it can be a little more difficult at times.
That's a cool layer there that I think when Nick and I, when we go do these clinics, we always talk about like motor preferences relates to so much outside of sport, but also relates to so many different parts of the sport. Like you said, like defensive wise, like maybe you have a little bit more supination when you're fielding a backhand, or maybe you're staying a little bit taller, or the big adjustment that you made was staying more on the run and you actually were more accurate because of it. So you can get really nuanced in every single facet of the game, whether it's your base running and how you're taking your lead. For softball, whether what foot is on the bag when you go to push off. Outfield, I remember working with Swope, one side I'd drop step more and the other side I'd cross over more, depending on my extension leg. So you can really get granular, in other facets of the game, not just, hitting and pitching, defense and all those small details. So I appreciated watching you, going to work and being behind you out there in the outfield and watching you doing your thing out there. That was cool.
Is granular a real word? I never heard of it.
Absolutely.
That's cool.
Welcome to the vocabulary.
Yeah, that's very nice. I like that.
Small detail.
Is it a real word?
How was
Granular.
that?
That's
Guys,
awesome.
second guessing my
I've never heard it used in a sentence before, but now I have. Now I have.
Perfect. Uh, what if you were to go back and look at yourself in high school, and what's cool is like Swope has kind of seen that progression from you at different levels, but what piece of advice would you give your high school self and maybe to young players like looking at you for advice?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think like for advice on if we're talking specifically about motor preferences first, I just say like at least try it, right? Like you're in high school, you have nothing to lose. I mean, yeah, like you're just younger and you have the ability to try things, right? Just at least like if you're amazingly successful and you're doing great, right? First be like, okay, are they throwing 72 miles an hour? Maybe that's why I'm really successful. But it's like you're probably doing a lot of the things that your body likes to do. So by understanding your motor preferences, you won't let someone coach that out of you just as much as it's going to be coached to you. So I think just understanding it, whether it's like, wow, I already do a lot of these things, or wow, okay, I really need to make some adjustments. For me, I wasn't super successful in high school, so I was like, wow, I need to make some adjustments. But for some kids that are super athletic and they're doing great and the competition's great, it's like, hey, learn these motor preferences so when you get to college and they're like, hey, everyone should swing like this. It's like, whoa, wait a second. Like I kind of have an idea. I have an idea of who I am, how I want to move, what makes me successful. It's not just kind of like something that happened. And then all of a sudden, you see it all the time. Guys are extraordinarily successful in high school, even in big name high schools facing big competition. And then they get to college and the coach is like, hey, we're all doing this. And they change. And all of a sudden they go from this amazingly athletic player. And now all of a sudden they're this like kind of robotic. They changed what made them successful. So on both sides of the spectrum, it's like, hey, make sure you understand why you're good. Or hey, you need to make some serious changes. Like this is going to be extremely helpful to give you a baseline.
What about outside of MP?
Outside of motor preferences,
Absolutely.
man, advice outside of motor preferences. I mean, if we're talking baseball in particular, I just think like what had made me successful is, like we talked about it a little bit, but just being super intentional, understanding what makes you successful, even if it's outside of motor preferences. Like for me, it was like nutrition, sleep, taking naps, like taking vitamins, supplements, creatine, taking care of you know, all the people around me and putting myself in a good position, not drinking, not like smoking, not going out. I mean, you can still go out. It's just like for me, I understood like drinking is poison, so I'm gonna do a little less of it, right? And so those things for me, I tried to be really intentional about everything I did. And that just helped to kind of take away some of the noise around high school moving into college, college moving into professional baseball, minor leagues moving into major leagues. It was like I have my routines. I know that I'm gonna get this amount of sleep per night. I know that, when I'm gonna eat as healthy as I can and all those things. So when it came to if I had baseball or just athlete advice, I'd say, hey, just take care of your business. Like it's not. I've always thought like it's not super complicated, right? Like I've read plenty of self-help books, and they all say the same thing basically, like work hard and be focused and be intentional and be good about your details, and that'll help you be successful, right? I mean, it's great. It's like the American dream. There you go. So it's like when it comes to your sport, yeah, just treat it like it's important. Sleep and eat right and do those things, and it'll help you be more successful. Yes, like I say that's like kind of a easy thing to say to people where it's like, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But life advice, man, that's a whole nother topic. So if we want to get into life advice, we'll move there next.
When this guy says take a nap, he literally means get his naps in. He could be full uniformed up, 7 minute timer, take a nap before the bus. And he would tell me, hey, just make sure I'm on time for the bus. Just bring me with you. No problem. 7 minutes.
Hey, that's the definition of get what you need. Um, the last question for you, and then we'll let you get out of here. What are you most excited about this season? Second year with the Cubs now. What are you looking forward to?
I look forward to so much having a long off season to like I was really stressed going into last year. I'm trying to make a team. I had like 4 or 5 games in spring to kind of try to prove that I was ready to make a team. And then going through a season where I didn't know what to expect. So I'm experiencing all new things. I'm really excited to have the time to address my weaknesses, to work on some things, to have a game plan. I just feel as though this year I'll be a lot more prepared, and that gives me a lot of peace with everything I'm doing around baseball. So I think I'm excited to have a lot more peace going into this year when it comes to my preparation and just understanding what I'm getting myself into and what the major league season looks like. That's it's still going to be a grind. Like it's just a grind no matter what. But at least I'll have an idea of what I'm getting into and what to expect. And I'll have time to address some of the things that were kind of really highlighted, like flaws and failures that I did last year that I will, be able to avoid going into this year.
Go Cubs. Simple.
Let's
Simple.
go.
Simple. Well, we appreciate you joining us and taking the time. Looking forward to seeing you soon, dude. And good luck this year, man. We'll be rooting for you as always.
Thanks a lot, Nicholas. I appreciate you guys. Thanks, Matthew and Swoper. And it was nice hanging out for sure.
Love you.